So clearly these are uncharted times. What is the president's role during these times of the coronavirus, civil unrest, the election year?
I think as president, I've been working very hard to stay focused on our mission and to provide the community an understanding of how our mission can operate during these times. And, I think of the mission as the guidepost for response. It tells us, these are the things that have to be, that we exist for. And then from the mission statement, we backtrack and say, okay, how will we accomplish this in this environment? Not will we, how will we? Yes.
So in your eyes, has the Ready and Resilient plan been successful this semester?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that when you look at the work of the committee, it has been a dynamic effort, meaning we're learning every week and having to shift gears, learn something else and shift to another gear. So I think the most powerful part of Ready and Resilient has been a collection of engaged faculty and staff about how to problem solve as issues emerged on our campus and across the country. You're learning. One of the things, for example, right now underway is a testing program in advance of Thanksgiving that we never could have been able to deliver back in August, just based on national resources. So as the country's been able to make progress, how we integrate that into our response, and just having that dedicated team. And I'd say that we are all part of the Ready and Resilient team. Watching students' response to the guidelines, even the students being able to shift gears when we changed the guide, and said, okay, we're moving to this alert level. Here are the new protocols. And the students having to learn, okay, can I do this? Can I not do this? Takeaway dining, keeping your social circles small. So it's kept our whole campus centered around a central communication point, which I think communications is critical for this effort, and around a willingness to pivot and to be nimble and to keep responding as we've learned more.
Mm-hmm. So as of today, more than 1 out of 10 students have tested positive on campus. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I wish the number had been lower. I think we all had hoped the number would be lower. I think that we learned as we went through this. One thing that Elon had going into it were a certain bucket of assets that some schools didn't have. For example, Elon lives in the middle of 660 acres versus being right in the middle of an urban setting where you're right in the middle of, like NYU, in the middle of a massive business district. So we came into this with assets, but we also came into this with challenges. And so you can see, for example, athletics. Athletics affects we have 400 student athletes. When you looked at the clusters that occurred in athletics, you could see that it took us, if you look at the data, about 3 days to get our arms around that. And you saw us get our arms around it through quarantine and isolation, and then we were able the next week to bring those numbers back. Mm-hmm. Well, the fraternity and sorority life is a much bigger number, yep. Right? Some schools don't have that challenge, so they didn't have to navigate a larger social club that like the fraternity and sorority life. So you saw our quarantine and isolation go this big, but it took us about 2 weeks, but we got our arms around it, and then it came back down. So every school has strengths in the middle of this and challenges in the middle of this, and so I think Elon navigated the challenge well, and the fact that we were able to get those numbers back down really speaks to our students and faculty and staff, and just the commitment to saying, hey, and everybody doubled down on the protocols, and quarantine and isolation's tough, but people did it, and it worked. We got the number back down.
I'm glad you brought up the clusters. So do you think it's important to disclose where these clusters are coming from? Because as a student athlete myself, when the first email came out and it said the student athletes have a cluster, there was a sense on my team that's, hey, it's not us though, and we were taking backlash from it. So what would you say to those student athletes that got backlash from that email saying the student athletes. to the
Actually, I think
cluster.
it did say which groups, right? So
The first one originally said
Yeah.
student athletes. The second one then broke down the teams. But in that time point,
Yeah, the health department does, we're required to report the clusters. I do think transparency is really critical. Right now, when you're dealing with a public health issue, there can be a lot of, that requires a lot of trust in systems. And so I think it's really critical to be transparent, provide the number, let people know how we're approaching it, who the people are working on it. I agree that there can be backlash, and I would say that kind of negative response is not informed as it needs to be. We can all get sick. We are all vulnerable to getting COVID-19, no matter what we do. We are all vulnerable. Whenever I hear that, it's disappointing that people are, but that was true for every new disease that we've encountered. People think you can will yourself not to be sick, and the truth is, we're vulnerable. We're human.
So you look down these long list of names on the Ready and Resilient team. Why aren't there any students on that?
Well, we do consult with students on that. I know I'm in personal communication with SGA leadership on many of the decisions and processes that happen. I think when it first came out, we were in the middle of the summer. I know that we have added students at different elements of that. I don't think there was any intentional effort to exclude students. I think it's more of structural and how we get feedback. I think of students too in a broader sense of consulting with the university on a lot of these efforts.
Do you regret not having students on the Ready and Resilient?
I wouldn't say that I regret it. I do think it's always valuable to have students on these. And so because the team has been the Ready and Resilient, reaching out and getting feedback from students, I don't think it's a negative that students aren't part of the regular structured of the meetings, as long as we're getting a feedback system.
How much has the university spent in total since March on coronavirus-related things?
I'll give you an estimate. We budgeted $5 million for the year, and we hit that this month.
And we've gone over it?
We're at $5 million.
You're at $5 million.
Yes.
So how is the school able to afford this?
So what we've done is for the next 2 years, everyone took a 5% budget cut. The whole campus took a 5% budget cut. We may, depending on how much the testing costs next spring, have to go back and look at, have we cut enough? We did a frost on positions and hiring, but I feel pretty good. The university is conservatively budgeted. We benefit from that. That means the board has a reserve that sits there in case our budgets go over for a year, and then we fill it back up the next year through reduced spending. So I feel pretty good right now that we're going to be able to finish the year and not have to do anything else.
How much do you anticipate the test costing for next
So
semester?
right now, like the state provided these 5,000 tests, these rapid tests. So, and I spoke to the group of college presidents that are navigating that supply with the Department of Health and Human Services. And so I'm confident we'll get more supplies in the spring. I'm not sure exactly how many more, but it will help defray the cost. But we're going to have additional costs. So you have to do this with so much of this. You're paying for hotel rooms to quarantine and isolate students, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if we can have more testing, we won't have those surges. So it probably is going to offset the cost for the need to have so many hotel rooms and those kinds of things. So I think we're going to be able to balance this out, and the cost of testing is coming down because the supply is getting greater.
Mm-hmm. So there are students that are going to the Minute Clinic and they don't have the rapid tests right now and today. Are we taking away from them for having them here at campus?
I'm not familiar with the Minute Clinic.
Or the Next Care, I'm sorry.
It's like a urgent care center?
It's like urgent care, yes.
I don't know about that. I think that actually the Health and Human Services is supplying a lot of people. They received 1 million rapid tests.
Okay.
The state did. And the whole effort of this is to try to get people to know quickly if you're infected, as a way these next few months are expected to be really challenging. They originally thought they would be shipping most of these tests through the K through 12 school system, but because many schools are still remote, we had access to them in higher education. So I don't think we're hurting any. I think people are happy to give as much testing as possible to help keep the numbers of sick people down.
So you mentioned the hotels, and that's where students are quarantining. How much did that cost the university?
I don't have exactly the numbers. So the testing, quarantine, and isolation, the technology in the classrooms, and the PPE, we hit $5 million this semester.
Okay, perfect. And do you think Elon has done enough for the freshmen that have come in, and then the freshmen that are looking to come here in the coming years?
I do think that we are learning how to have healthy events, like last night's Luminaries. I thought that was actually such a great event, because normally we would have all been clustered in a crowd around the fountain. And it was so nice to have it spread out, to have the different stations. And it just demonstrates how critical it is that we adopt as a community a growth mindset around the lessons we're learning through our response to coronavirus. So I think we're learning about how to deliver these events. I'm looking forward to the increased testing next J-term in the spring, because I think it will allow us also to provide more healthy events. I think, they're working on a list now, and I've seen some of the preliminary ideas, and many of them are focused on first-year students. And I had several healthy, small social circles with first-year students over the last 2 months to hear how things are going. And largely, I hear two observations. One is a lot of gratitude. They had missed their senior spring traditions and graduations, and so they were just grateful to be able to start college, to move into their residence halls, begin to form relationships. On the flip side of that, the largest challenge has been that their social circles have been limited to smaller groups. So most describe 5 to 10 people. Whereas when we're thinking about college, they were thinking about those being much larger, joining clubs and organizations where they would get to know people. And being in class, and if you're in class and you only can see half of a person's face, they talk about not recognizing their classmates, and even not recognizing people who live on their halls, until they actually start interacting with them. And when you hear that, you realize what a challenge it is to form relationships right now. Probably not so much for our upper class students who came back and saw friends and reconnected, but you can imagine being a first-year student off to college. You maybe know a handful of people attending that same college, but really trying to get to know people in class or through organizations, that being a real challenge.
Now, for these students that broke those social circles, what would you say to them?
That did what?
Broke their social circles and got the coronavirus and were hanging out with more people than they should have been.
I have had several conversations with people who haven't. I would say, one, most of them talk first and say, I regret, not. I think they thought they wouldn't get it. And then when they saw that not only did they get it, but they brought it back and gave it to roommates or other friends, some deep regret about not having more responsible behavior in that moment. So I'm grateful for that personal reflection of responsibility. And I ask them, when I talk to them, I say, share that story. Tell people that story, because people, I think we all think we're invincible to illness. That we're, especially when I was young and healthy, when I was younger, I'm still healthy, but when I was younger, I did too. Like, I never imagined a day that I, would be faced with aging and the consequence of aging. And so I get it. I can see it. But at the same time, we all agreed to a set of healthy behavior when we arrived. And our expectation is that students will adhere to that.
Mm-hmm. So moving on from the coronavirus, do you think Alamance County is a safe place for Elon students?
I think largely it absolutely is a safe place for Elon students. I do think we have real challenges in Alamance County, so I don't take the concerns that I have or that the community has lightly.
What would those challenges be?
Well, I've articulated a challenge around the Confederate Monument in Graham. It sits in front of the courthouse, which Elon has ties to that monument in that the brother of Elon's founding president was one of the ones instrumental in having it erected back at the turn of the century. That monument is a known point of divisiveness, and it stages potential violence every day that it continues to be in front of the courthouse. And I signed a letter along with Emeritus President Leo Lambert asking for it to be removed, and hundreds of other members of the county joined us in that. And we call on the county commissioners to provide some leadership and to do that. Put it in a place where it can have historical reference markers, and people who want to visit it can visit it, but it is, in its current location, continues to be a point of divide, and I think that it needs to have a response from the county.
Mm-hmm. So clearly there was a convoy that came through campus, and they were shouting things to students, and I've talked to a bunch of students, and one African American student said that they called out the hard R word to her plenty of times, and she said, it's not just the convoy, on other days this happens too. How can you promise these students that we are going to be safe, and we can be safe on campus?
Well, I don't believe that's a promise that I can make, that they'll be that they won't experience what I would refer to as street hate, people driving by and shouting sexist and racist things from their cars. What I can say is that we won't stop working to end that until it's gone. And so that has been my commitment to the students, and we continue to aggressively monitor the traffic through campus and around the perimeter. Mm-hmm. I think our strategies have been very successful over the last month in reducing that activity and creating a quiet around campus. I have been meeting with the Black Student Union leadership and talking about actionable ways that we can continue to keep our campus safe. The roundtable recommendations that came back were very helpful. That dialogue resulted in several action items that some have already been implemented, some are underway. But I think that provides us a great roadmap for immediately things we can do to make the campus safer. But it will continue, an ongoing effort, and we won't stop until we feel that the campus is free from that harassment.
A lot of people on social media have been wishing that you said Black Lives Matter sooner. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
Absolutely, Black Lives Matter. I'm happy to say it. I'm happy to express that. My original statement to the campus had that sentiment where I said that our Black colleagues and Black members of our community deserved a full and equitable life. I made that statement in advance of the Black Lives Matter movement taking off around the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders. So I'm happy to continue to say Black Lives Matter.
So clearly there was just an election. Do you think the election of former Vice President Joe Biden, now President-elect, will help this community? Will it hurt this community? How do you feel like it's going to be on campus?
I can speak about it from two levels. And I thought, one, I'll just say that I thought the public art road closure on Haggard that we work with the town of Elon to accomplish, what a great way post-election to provide hope for the future of our country. No matter what party you aligned your voting with, I don't know if you had a chance to read those statements of hope, but I found them really a powerful voice. And just having young people who I think of as the future of our country, those thoughts that should give all of us hope for what's ahead, which I absolutely believe is something remarkable, the way the words of the young people on those signs. So I think of it very practically in my role as president. So Joe Biden, we saw international enrollment decline over the Trump presidency, and so very hopeful that under the Biden presidency that we can resolve those conflicts around international enrollment, support for DACA students to be able to continue uninterrupted in college. We also know that student loan, they impact the student loans, interest, and hoping for some kind of program to help with student loan and debt relief for college students across the country. I'm a big fan of the community colleges being free for students, and so I think we'll probably see some more traction on that. And first-generation college students. So it's I think lots of potential here for higher education, and I think we can work toward goals to ensure more college attainment across our country.
So clearly there was a march to the polls in Graham a couple weeks ago, and 2 students were there marching to the polls with the group going to vote. However, they were arrested while going to vote. What would you have to say to that with the safety of students voting here in Alamance County?
If I recall correctly, I did visit with one of the students who was arrested, and I asked him about it, and his intent in going was to experience Alamance County, to have that moment. And I could tell from his observations that it was a really transformative moment for him to participate. And I encourage all of our students to exercise their right to freely assemble, the freedom of the press, and so that moment is just right at the heart of our Constitution and the rights afforded to people. And I think it's critical for our democracy to work that those activities are protected. And the second half of your question.
I think you answered
about
it,
the
honestly.
right to vote. And then we had our own walk to the polls here. We've worked very intentionally at Elon to establish a polling place on walking distance to campus. And an Elon grad actually runs the Board of Elections here in Alamance County. I was so pleased to see students and staff work the polls. In that we were able to afford staff the opportunity to have a paid day off, which is a supplement to our normal policy around presidential voting and having paid time off to vote. So I really love the engagement this year that the Elon Votes students put together, and really was proud that so many students requested absentee ballots, and we'll find out soon how many of them cast those ballots, but I feel like we're going to see a really great number.
Now, do you think since Joe Biden was elected that would help or hurt the safety of Alamance County? Seeing that there was a convoy coming through campus, there's a bunch of people who weren't fans of Joe Biden. Do you think that's going to help or hurt the safety?
I don't think it'll have an impact on the safety. I feel like it's kind of that's neutral. I guess I'm not connecting the dots.
Okay, that's fine. Do you think you feel like you were being transparent enough and visible enough to the student body this year?
Yes. Is that a yes or no? Is there a concern about my transparency?
Well, some people have said they're not sure if they can trust the administration enough and have been outspoken about it. So how do you regain trust from those people who feel like they don't have trust anymore?
I think trust is critical. I think there's so many things pressing against trust right now. We've got a major health issue. That's why I think transparency is so important about the way we're addressing it. I actually make myself very available to students. I am on campus. I have regular walks and other ways in which I advertise that I'm on the calendar and available to students. And a lot of students take me up on that and reach out and have coffee or lunches, other opportunities that are regularly. And I learned so much from those conversations. So I really appreciate the back and forth and feedback that students provide. The goal is to be transparent. Yeah.
Now, do you believe students have valid concerns about the call to the removal of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy?
So I report to the board. So I report the way the structure. Mm-hmm. So I think because of that, it's a conflict of interest actually for me to it would be a conflict for me to comment on my bosses.
Yeah. Do you understand though why the students would have these concerns?
I have heard from both sides of this issue. So I've heard from a group of students who believe one aspect and another group that believes another aspect. And what I have found is that there's very little middle ground on this issue. People are decided that the charges again made by the representatives and senators that aligned with the Democratic Party are true, and then another group believes the ones being made by the testimony that Louis DeJoy gave and the Republicans are true. So I find that there's very little middle ground on this issue about Louis DeJoy. I'm not personally knowledgeable enough about the United States Postal Service and its operations to weigh in, and I think it'd be inappropriate for me to do that.
Absolutely, and our time's winding down now, so just a couple more questions. So you have a son and you have a daughter. When they call you this year, what are their concerns? What do they ask you? Mom, are you okay? What are their kind of questions to you?
Well, sometimes they see social media and they say, Mom, don't look at social media. They're both, my daughter's in law school at Michigan, and Michigan's having its own issues around COVID. So she calls frequently and tells me what's happening on Michigan's campus and shares, thoughts on that as well as asking me how Elon's response is going. My son Joe is an Elon grad. So he mostly is asking about very specific things, like about study abroad and what's happening there. And he was a music major. How are you being able to do those classes? And I've shared with him how creative things are on campus right now. And he came to visit. And saw the tents up. And I told him how we are getting this peek at what happens in the classroom outside the classroom. So we're seeing the dance classes on the lawn. We're seeing faculty lecturing under these tents and hearing parts of those lectures, music performances, and how different it is, but also that it's challenging us in good ways. Just like having the Adirondack chairs on Young Commons. Normally Young Commons is so beautiful, and you can even see the rows of the lawnmowers, and it's so picture. And just to have the chairs and the fire pits, I think it's more accessible. It feels more community. And I don't know, we wouldn't have done all of that without the coronavirus. And while no one wants a pandemic or COVID, I do think it's teaching us a lot about our community and ways in which we can be more accessible.
And clearly, this is the last question. You are at the front of all the backlash. So how are you dealing with this? Are you stressed? How are you dealing with your stress?
That is a good question. But I say this for all of us because I think we're all warriors right now in the COVID. Is that I absolutely try to get enough rest, and I exercise every day, and I still gained weight, which is problematic. But
I feel like all of us have.
It must be just because we're more sedentary in other ways. So I've been trying to figure that one out. But That being said, if I am attentive to taking good personal care, and I encourage all of our students, particularly, right, we've got exams coming up. This is like the stressful week of last minute projects and getting things done. I do think that personal care is on the front line of my thinking. So that it is stressful. It is stressful for everyone, right? And we're not comfortable because we're using all these different tools. So we all feel a sense of discomfort in how we're approaching study, how we're approaching work. And so just to help us to have some, kindness toward ourselves and patience with ourselves, that, we eat, we sleep, and we exercise so that we can approach these difficult days with the best tool set we can.